It didn't take long for the Foundation to hear about the chaos in the Tokyo subway, a mass casualty event where hundreds, if not thousands, had been killed or transformed. There was no possible explanation for all this that wasn't anomalous. Little did the Foundation know, the truth they would soon discover was even more horrifying than their preliminary intel could even suggest. A legion of mobile task forces and field agents based in the SCP Foundation's Japanese branch descended into the subway. They had the joint intentions of isolating the anomalous element and extracting survivors. They'd need to pore over surveillance footage and figure out every single person who'd been in the subway during the incident, then track them down for amnestic treatment. Among the blood and the horrifically transformed bodies, they found him, Tomoru Shigaraki, the symbol of terror. He'd been on the Foundation's internal most wanted list for a while, always staying just one step ahead, directing evil actions through his many anomalous and villainous associates. He almost never allowed himself to be caught out in public like this. And more than just being exposed, the villain seemed injured, bloody and bashed, panting with exertion. This wasn't just some random attack against the civilian population. Shigaraki must have been facing off against another powerful anomalous entity, and now he was the only one left here. But of course, that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. As Mobile Task Force soldiers approached and tried to box the villain in, he lashed out with his trademark gamer rage. He manifested a horrifying array of grasping hands, which enveloped and grabbed some of the soldiers nearest to him, activating his original and most terrifying quirk, decay. It's a simple mechanism. Anything that Shigaraki touches with all 5 fingers of one of his hands will begin to decay, and the more powerful he's gotten, the faster the decay sets in, as those unfortunate MTF operatives were quickly finding out. Their bodies were atomized in moments, their screams dying in their dissolving throats, all while Shigaraki gave a deranged, villainous laugh. Oh, he could mount those worthless Foundation foot soldiers all day, every day. But he was so wrapped up in his small-minded sadism, he didn't even notice the auxiliary troops putting a series of Scranton reality anchors in the general vicinity, activating them all in unison. The combined Hume moderation field negated the worst of his quirk. While the corrosive villain was distracted by the dissipation of his extra hands, the soldiers shot him with several powerful tranquilizer darts. Yelling half-slurred insults and curses, Shigaraki fell to the ground, and the Foundation forces moved in around him. They put special gauntlets made of SCP-148, telekill, and anti-anomalous metal around his hands. Then they strapped him to a Hannibal Lecter-style security stretcher and had him lifted out of the subway tunnels. Hundreds of field agents spilled into the streets to assist in disaster relief efforts and provide amnestic treatment to the survivors. Meanwhile, Shigaraki was secretly spirited away from the city and taken to the nearest Foundation containment facility for studying and developing countermeasures. And they also had a frightening question to answer. What other entity was dangerous enough to fight something as powerful as Shigaraki to a standstill? Someone would be getting an answer. But it wouldn't be the SCP Foundation, not yet anyway. Hundreds of miles away, a Sarkic cult, the Brotherhood of the Corrupted Flesh, was performing a ritual. Sarkists, in case you need a reminder, are a decentralized group of interest that worships flesh, disease, and corruption of the living form. Many of them practiced horrifying forms of flesh magic, creating pathogens like the flesh that hates, widely considered capable of causing an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, if ever they broke containment. And today they were cooking up a new diabolical anomalous project, the Haruspex of their little chapter, capable of reading the future in animal intestines, had said that some imbalance into the very nature of the universe had occurred. It would be the perfect time to perform one of their most sacred dark rites, one that would birth a monstrous entity in service of their cause into the world. A dark rite that their ancient Karsus texts called the man-made cursed womb. It had involved taking 50 prisoners over the last 3 months and dragging them all back to the complex underground cave system that they'd made into their lair. Their on-site flesh crafters had slowly transformed these 50 people into a giant ball of living, conscious meat, like a kind of massive external wound. They would all retain their own minds, but be unable to control their huge combined body. Their pain, their distress, their fear and hatred of each other would all fuse within the crucible of their mutated form, creating something new and, to their mind, beautiful. The members of the Brotherhood of the Corrupted Flesh gathered around the man-made cursed womb and began to chant, lending the terrible abomination their energy, their intent, their fear, and malice. And as the power built, the man-made womb split like an immense blooming flower that smelled like 100 rotting corpses and the coppery tang of old blood. And the fruit of that great flower of flesh and blood was a tall man in black clothing, his pale skin covered in Frankenstein-esque stitches. It was the infinitely cruel curse of man's fear of man, the cursed spirit, Mjito, reborn after being killed in his prior fight with the villain Shigaraki. Since no human fear ever really died, anytime their physical body was destroyed, the curse representing that fear could return, reincarnated at some later date. And these enterprising sarkists had just sped the process along. Still, this meant that Mahito had been gone from the world for a good few hours, and those were hours of causing pain and chaos that he'd missed out on. Now he needed to make up for lost time, and now he had plenty of subjects to ply his monstrous trade on. The High Priest of the Brotherhood of the Corrupted Flesh stepped forward and bowed.
"Oh, great curse, welcome to this plain and sinful world. Your powers will be of great use here. We wish only to know how we can assist you."
Mahito wasn't even listening to what he said. The whole spiel seemed unbearably boring, but if these sorcerers were able to serve his purposes, Mahito would let them live. Well, most of them. He touched the High Priest mid-sentence, and immediately the shape of the man's soul began to warp. The High Priest screamed, half in fear, half in the sheer ecstasy of being transformed, as his body warped into a monstrous creature. For a high-ranking member of the Sarkic Church, there would be no greater honor than being transformed into something so much more than human. Such was the power of Mahito's curse technique, idle transfiguration. As a powerful conduit of cursed energy, he was able to use his power to reshape the nature of souls, including his own, and warp the bodies in the process. This not only made him an adept shapeshifter, it also allows him to do horrific things to the bodies of anyone he physically touches, whether it's to completely destroy them or turn them into mindless monsters that do his bidding. In other words, the Sarkics really liked his style.
"First things first, new friends,"
Mahito said.
"I've got a score I need to settle. Where can I find that little, ingrate Shigaraki?"
Mahito doesn't have the answer to that question right now, but we do. The arch-villain was waking up in a Foundation containment cell, boarded on all sides by the telekill walls and active Scranton reality anchors, all hoping to dampen his potentially devastating powers. With Shigaraki on the inside, they needed to test the potential of his anomalous quirks and develop containment procedures accordingly. Thankfully, dealing with an entity like Shigaraki wasn't entirely unprecedented. His corrosive decay quirk was undeniably powerful, but they'd built contingency measures against corrosive anomalies before. Similar technology could be deployed to keep Shigaraki in place, for now. Senior researchers were brought in to interview the villain remotely, asking him a number of questions about his activities prior to being captured. He was resistant to all methods of questioning at first, simply laughing off the queries and hurling threats at the cameras on the walls. He was informed that if he made any attempt to break beyond the bounds of his containment, several fuel hoses were rigged to set the entire room on fire around him, which, even if it didn't manage to kill him, would certainly hurt. That cooled down the threats at least. When the researchers asked him about who he'd been fighting in the subway before they had arrived, he suddenly became a lot more loose-lipped.
"I can't believe you're even interested in that patch-faced normie, when you've got a real villain like me in custody," he said, voice dripping with venom. "Handsy freak had no sense of personal space. That trash was barely even worth my time."
When a researcher mentioned that it seemed like it was a pretty close fight, Shigaraki began to almost palpably shake with rage.
"Let's not talk about Mahito,"
he said, as researchers wrote down that name and began cross-referencing rigorously.
Let's talk about this place. I hear you've got some interesting monsters on file here. Let me see. There's SCP-682, right? A monster that can adapt to anything you throw at it. And SCP-076-2, an immortal warrior with superlative physical skills, capable of producing weapons from localized pocket dimensions and resurrecting after death.
He went on, listing off several other high-profile anomalies that were indeed stationed at the site. SCP-352 Baba Yaga, capable of producing almost invisible strands of hallucinogenic hair. SCP-953, the polymorphic humanoid, who could affect people's perceptions of her. And SCP-343 God, known for his unmatched reality warping powers. As he mentioned each of these anomalies, as casually as someone might reel off a shopping list, the researchers were starting to panic. One of them asked over the microphone how he could possibly come to know all this. Shigaraki just gave another dismissive laugh.
Try before you buy. Don't you think it makes sense for me to find out about these quirks before I take them? With them in my arsenal, nothing could stop me. I'd be the greatest villain who ever lived, he said. But I couldn't figure out where you guys were keeping them all. That's the problem. Who'd have thought that it would have to be as simple as pretending that Scranton reality anchors work on me?
Everything that happened after occurred in a matter of seconds, but it felt like it was playing in slow motion. Shigaraki manifested hundreds of huge, mutated hands, reaching out and grabbing at every side of the containment chamber, from the walls to the cameras to the fuel hoses. He began to apply the maximum extent of this walking plague's decay quirk. The room collapsed around him before anyone could remedy the situation, as the tidal wave of deadly grasping claws expanded outwards. Guards and researchers alike started to decay away to nothing. And unlike an SCP-106 breach, there was no throwing a D-class into the femur breaker to lure him back. He was here with a deadly purpose, to absorb the powers of some of the deadliest anomalies that the Foundation had in containment, all thanks to his all-for-one ability. And if he did that, he might be able to upgrade himself to a one-man XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. The word was sent out immediately to all nearby containment stations. Scramble every available guard, field agent, and mobile task force. Because if Shigaraki was able to get his many hands on the powers he was after here, then all of the forces that the Foundation could summon might not be able to defeat him. Of course, there was one unexpected element that neither Shigaraki nor the SCP Foundation could anticipate, and it was heading straight towards both of them. Mjito, backed by his new acolytes, the Brotherhood of the Corrupted Flesh, as well as the legion of transfigured mutants that Mahito had made along the way. Among them was a strong contingent of polymorphic soul isomers, fusions of transfigured human beings that had greater offensive power at the cost of power defensive capabilities. And this wasn't the same Mahito that Shigaraki faced in the Tokyo subway. On top of his natural degree of immense cursed energy, he'd been galvanized by sarkic flesh magic, increasing his strength and durability tenfold. All of this, coupled with the desire for bloody vengeance against the symbol of fear for destroying his previous incarnation, would make him a true force to be reckoned with this time. And thanks to the insider knowledge of the sarkic cultists, they'd also been able to find that Shigaraki's capture had been logged in the SCP Foundation database, and more importantly, which site he was being contained in. What a perfect battleground for the second leg of their battle. Back at the site, Shigaraki was wreaking more havoc, dissolving and annihilating fleeing researchers and advancing guards. It was almost too easy. The Foundation was concentrating all of its forces on keeping Shigaraki away from the containment wing, where he could absorb all the powers he wanted. But how long could they really keep him at bay? Thankfully, they wouldn't need to do that alone for long. Not that the cavalry, in this case, would be any better for the rest of the staff posted at the site. The perimeter wall burst open, ruptured by several massive tendrils of flesh, composed of hundreds of transfigured humans that Mahito had added to his entourage. He emerged like the king of a nightmarish new army into the Foundation facility, giving Shigaraki pause for his rampage.
Wait, he said. Didn't I kill you?
Mahito just smirked. I got better. There was one more thing he needed to do. Drawing upon cursed energy, fear, hatred, despair, and his knowledge of himself and his own power, he drew up everything he had and underwent a horrifying transformation, a tornado of meat and bone. And by the time he was done, he was incarnated into his most devastatingly powerful form, instant spirit body of distorted killing.
So, Tenko,
Mahito said, using Shigaraki's birth name just to twist the knife.
Think you're man enough to survive round 2?
Now check out SCP Foundation Contains One Punch Man, Saitama's Big Surprise, and Tales from the SCP Front Lines, 14 Scariest Battles, for more.